On a Tuesday morning last spring, a red Toyota Camry pulled into my bay with 87,000 miles on the clock and an owner who had already visited a dealership the week before. He was not panicking, he was resigned. They had quoted him north of $1,400 for a throttle body replacement and a software recalibration. His gas mileage had dropped. The idle shook slightly at red lights. The car hesitated off the line like it was thinking too long before committing. The dealership told him those were the symptoms of a failing sensor and that the fix required specialized tools only their service department could access. He handed me the estimate. I handed it back. Then I walked him to the front of his car, showed him a sequence of button presses that takes about 45 seconds, and told him to watch what happened when I turned the key. The idle smoothed out immediately. The hesitation was gone before we finished the driveway loop. The fuel trim numbers I was watching on my scanner had already started correcting themselves. He drove away that afternoon, spending nothing. That moment is the reason I am making this video. Because what I used that day was not a secret tool. It was not dealer-only software. It was not something buried in a technical service bulletin that only trained technicians are supposed to know. It was a factory-built menu sitting inside every Toyota ever made, doing nothing, waiting for someone to use it. Toyota calls it the diagnostic data list. Most owners have never heard of it. Most dealerships prefer you never find it. And once you understand what it does and why it matters, the way you think about your Toyota will change permanently. Here is the uncomfortable reality about modern Toyotas. They are not simple machines anymore. They are rolling computer networks wrapped around an engine. The powertrain control module, commonly called the ECM, manages fuel delivery, throttle response, idle control, and variable valve timing all at once, constantly, every fraction of a second you are driving. The transmission has its own brain. The anti-lock braking system has its own brain. The climate control module makes decisions independently, and all of them communicate through a shared data bus, trading numbers back and forth like a conversation you are never part of. That architecture is brilliant when everything is working correctly. But modern Toyota engines do something most drivers never account for. They learn. The ECM does not operate from a fixed map. It adapts. When you drive short trips repeatedly, the engine learns short trip behavior. When a mass airflow sensor starts reading slightly low, the ECM compensates by adding fuel and stores that compensation as a long-term correction. When the idle air control system gets slightly gummed up with carbon, the engine figures out how to idle around the obstruction and treats the workaround as normal. Every adaptation gets saved. Every compromise gets cemented. Over time, the ECM is no longer running your engine efficiently. It is running a ghost version of your engine, one built around problems that may have been cleaned, replaced, or corrected long ago, but never told the computer. This is why Toyota owners with well-maintained vehicles still experience rough idle, sluggish throttle response, reduced fuel economy, and strange transmission behavior. The parts are fine. The data is corrupted. The diagnostic data list is the window into all of it. It is a real-time sensor readout menu built into every Toyota and Lexus vehicle, and it shows you exactly what your ECM, the engine control module, is seeing. Not what it is doing, but what it believes is true. Fuel trim values, throttle position, intake air temperature, manifold absolute pressure, coolant temperature, injector pulse width, oxygen sensor behavior. All of it live, streaming from the actual sensors in real time, without any scan tool, without any subscription software, and without any dealership involvement. Here is how to access it. This works on virtually every Toyota built since 2000, including Camry, Corolla, RAV4, Highlander, Tacoma, 4Runner, Prius, and Tundra models. The specific button sequence varies slightly by generation, but the core method is consistent. Start with the engine fully warmed up. This is critical. Cold sensor data is meaningless because the ECM runs on open-loop logic until operating temperature is reached. Open loop means the computer is ignoring the oxygen sensors entirely, and it is running on a preset map. You need closed-loop operation to see what the engine actually believes. With the engine warm and idling, turn the climate control system off. On most Toyota models, hold the trip reset button on the instrument cluster while cycling the ignition from on to off. On Prius and newer Camry models, the sequence involves holding the odometer reset button while turning the key to position 2, not start the engine. The display will shift from standard trip data into a raw data stream that reads differently from anything you have seen on the dashboard before. What you are looking at is the Engine Control Module Truth Table. These are the numbers that govern every combustion decision happening beneath your hood. The most important values to understand are the fuel trim readings. Toyota engine control modules display both short-term fuel trim and long-term fuel trim, often abbreviated STFT and LTFT. These numbers are expressed as percentages, and they tell you whether your engine is adding or subtracting fuel from its baseline programming to stay at the correct air-fuel ratio. A healthy engine sits close to 0 on both readings, within plus or minus 5% at idle and within plus or minus 10% under load. When those numbers drift, everything downstream starts costing you money. If your long-term fuel trim is sitting at positive 12% or higher, the engine control module has been adding extra fuel for weeks or months to compensate for something it perceives as a lean condition. That something could be a partially clogged fuel injector, a vacuum leak in the intake, a dirty mass airflow sensor, or a sluggish upstream oxygen sensor that is giving the system false information about what is happening in the exhaust stream. The engine is burning more fuel than it should. Your mileage is suffering. The car may still feel normal because the engine control module is doing its job of hiding the problem. If your long-term fuel trim is sitting at negative 10% or lower, the reverse is true. The engine is pulling fuel back because it believes it is running too rich. This often points to a leaking fuel injector dribbling fuel into the cylinder when it should be closed, an evaporative emissions leak, or a faulty oxygen sensor that reads rich when conditions are actually correct. Either scenario is money leaving your tank unnecessarily. Both scenarios are visible immediately through the diagnostic data list, long before you spend $1 at a shop. Beyond fuel trims, the menu gives you access to the coolant temperature sensor reading, which tells you whether the thermostat is functioning correctly. A thermostat stuck open is one of the most overlooked causes of fuel economy loss on Toyotas, particularly on Camry models from 2009 to 2019. The engine never fully reaches operating temperature. It runs on open-loop enrichment longer than it should, and it burns 15 to 20% more fuel on every cold start, indefinitely. Mechanics often miss it because the car never overheats and never throws a code. But the coolant temperature sensor in the diagnostic data list shows it clearly. A warm engine on a warm day should be reading between 195 and 220 degrees Fahrenheit. If it is sitting at 165 after 30 minutes of driving, your thermostat needs replacement, and your fuel economy has been suffering because of it. The throttle position sensor data visible through this menu is equally telling. A healthy throttle body on a 4-cylinder Toyota should show a closed throttle reading between 5 and 10% at idle. If it reads higher, carbon buildup on the throttle plate is holding it slightly open, and the idle air control system is fighting against it constantly. You may notice a rough idle or a slightly high idle speed. More importantly, the engine control module is storing fuel and timing compensations around that contaminated baseline, and even after you clean the throttle body, those stored values continue influencing combustion until you force a reset. This is where the second part of what Toyota built into these vehicles becomes critical: the initialization procedures. Toyota engineering teams included several service initialization routines in the engine control module software specifically to wipe adaptive memory and force the system to relearn from a clean baseline. These are not hacks. They are documented procedures that Toyota technicians are trained to perform after specific repair operations. They are simply never explained to owners, and most dealerships do not mention them unless they are billing for the labor time to perform them. The idle air volume learning procedure, sometimes called the throttle valve fully closed position learning sequence, forces the engine control module to measure the actual minimum airflow through the throttle body and reset its idle control baseline. On most Toyota vehicles from 2006 to present, this is triggered by a specific sequence performed with the vehicle at operating temperature, accessories off, and the transmission in park or neutral. You bring the engine to operating temperature, switch off all electrical loads, and then execute a key cycle sequence while watching the idle speed change through its relearning process. The exact sequence varies between the four-cylinder 2ARFE engine found in Camry and RAV4, the V6 2GRFE engine found in Highlander and Tacoma, and the hybrid system in Prius models, but the principle is identical across all of them. The engine control module wipes its stored idle compensation values and rebuilds them from reality. The effect is often immediate and striking. Owners who have been living with a rough or high idle for months see it disappear within seconds. The idle settles to a steady, calm 650 to 750 revolutions per minute and stays there. The engine control module is no longer compensating for assumptions. It is working from current, accurate data. The transmission learning reset is a separate procedure that applies particularly to Toyota's 6-speed and 8-speed automatics found in the 2018 to present Camry, 2019 to present RAV4, and the current Highlander. The Toyota Direct Shift transmission uses its own adaptive shift module, and this module stores learned shift patterns based on your driving history. Under normal conditions, that learning is beneficial. The transmission gets softer and smoother over time. A transmission control module reset forces the system to rebuild its shift adaptation from scratch. After a battery replacement, a fluid service, or any event that disrupts the voltage supply to the transmission control module, the stored shift data can conflict with the actual hydraulic behavior of the transmission. The result is harsh shifts, delayed engagement, or a noticeable thunk when the transmission moves between gears. Toyota dealers charge between $90 and $150 for this procedure. The procedure itself takes about 8 minutes, involves a specific driving cycle through defined speed ranges and throttle positions, and requires nothing except the initialization sequence available through the vehicle's own onboard system. There is a much less discussed system specific to Toyota and Lexus vehicles that very few owners ever learn about: the diagnostic trouble code pending monitor reset. Toyota engine control modules, called ECMs, store two types of fault information. One is confirmed codes that illuminate the check engine light. The other is pending codes, which represent faults the system has detected but not yet confirmed as persistent. These are the pending entries that do not yet become confirmed faults. Pending codes do not turn on any warning light. They create no obvious symptom, but they do influence adaptive control behavior. The engine control module sees a borderline sensor reading, stores it as a potential concern, and begins making compensations based on that reading even before the issue fully develops. Clearing pending code memory without clearing confirmed codes is possible through the data menu, and it represents a targeted diagnostic step that many professional technicians use but rarely explain. If a compensation clears and the vehicle behavior improves, you have identified the source of the problem before it became an expensive confirmed fault. The most powerful use of everything I have just described is not reactive. It is preventive. Checking the diagnostic data list on your Toyota takes about 4 minutes. You warm the engine up, enter the menu, scroll through the fuel trim readings, verify the coolant temperature, glance at the oxygen sensor switching behavior, and exit. If the numbers are clean, you know your engine is operating efficiently and the engine control module is working from accurate data. If something is drifting, you know about it before it becomes a code, before it becomes a rough idle, before it becomes a shop visit. I do this check on customer vehicles before any other diagnostic step because it tells me more in 3 minutes than most scan tool readouts tell me in 30. Not because it is magical, but because it is honest. It shows what the computer actually believes, not what a third-party scanner interprets. The driver who came in with that $1,400 estimate did not have a failing throttle body. He had a throttle body that needed cleaning and an ECM that had been compensating for a partially obstructed idle airway for so long that it had lost its clean baseline entirely. 45 seconds of initialization procedures, a 20-minute cleaning job, and the car was better than it had been in 2 years. The dealer was not trying to rob him. They diagnosed the symptom correctly. They never looked at the cause because looking costs nothing, and shops cannot bill for looking at factory menus. You can, and you should. Before the next time a warning light comes on, before the next time someone tells you a sensor needs replacement, before the next time you accept that your fuel mileage is just going to be a little worse this year than last year, check the numbers. The factory built the tool into the car for a reason. That reason was so someone could see the truth before spending money on assumptions. Your Toyota is not failing quietly. It is talking constantly. The data menu is how you listen. And once you start listening, you realize it was never a mystery. It was always just information no one bothered to show you. If this saved you from a dealer trip or changed how you think about your vehicle, hit like, because more Toyota owners need to see this. Subscribe for weekly breakdowns that put the knowledge back in your hands. Drop your specific Toyota model in the comments because in the next video, I am going through the exact initialization sequences for each platform: Camry, RAV4, Tacoma, Highlander, and Prius, step by step, so you can perform every one of these procedures at home without guessing. The most expensive thing you can do with a Toyota is assume someone else understands it better than you can. That assumption ends today.